Thanks for having me. As your professor said, my name is Bob McDonald. I'm the Director of Public Health Inspections within the Department of Environmental Health, and most of you would probably refer to that as the Health Department and might refer to me as an inspector, although I really don't do too many inspections anymore. As a division director in the department, I oversee a number of different programs that are kind of inspection-based and regulatory-based. But the one I'm going to talk about the most today is the food safety program, because I think that's probably what most of you are getting into, correct? I mean, some of you, how many of you are, with a show of hands, are studying maybe hospitality management? Is that okay? Quite a few of you. And how many are maybe nutrition? Okay. That's like eating healthy, right? Isn't that what that is? Like vegetables and stuff? Yeah, I read on that. So, regardless of whether you're nutrition or hospitality management, I can tell you that you are most likely getting into a regulated industry, unless maybe you work in some small facet of food safety. But even as a nutritionist, there's a food safety component to that. And your professor has given me the opportunity, after I talk about a few things related to food safety, to give a shameless plug to consider working for the Department of Health. Because if you are going to get a degree in nutrition or in hospitality management, we'd like to have a chat with you. Historically, we used to hire people with degrees in biology and microbiology, and that's good to have. But quite honestly, when you start with, at least with our agency, and I suspect with a lot of employers it's this way, they're going to teach you what you need to know. I mean, this will set the foundation for that, but they're going to teach you what they want you to know, how they want you to do things, and maybe towards the end of the presentation, I'll give you some tips about the most important thing to focus on if you are interviewing with our department, okay? But before I do that, I've been asked to talk a little bit about, the importance of, first of all, becoming ServSafe certified, and maybe to dispel some of the myths about food safety and the types of complaints that we get. And I got to tell you that before I worked for the health department, I thought the same thing that most everybody thinks of when they talk to my staff members when they do inspections. If a person's running the kitchen, we hear some of the same things that I heard when I used to work in a kitchen that are misconceptions about the health department or food safety. I can tell you that I used to work in restaurants for about 10 years. In fact, many years ago, I started out my career working at a Taco Bell up in Fort Collins, washing down the parking lot. That was my first job in the hospitality industry. And then I kind of moved up from, I think you have to move up from there. There's no worse job than that, right? So, but that was my job. I started washing down the parking lot, and then after, I did a good job with it, and after a couple of years, they let me come inside and actually start working with the food. And I was the guy who was always charged with keeping the inspector stalled when he showed up to do an inspection. Y'all laughing at this, so you must be the guy who does that in where you work, right? What's that? Okay. Well, yeah, that was me. My manager always used to send me out there and say, "Oh God, the health department's here. You quick, go out and stall." And I didn't know what I was supposed to do, so I'd go out there and I'd say, "Oh, hey, my name is so and so. You're with the health department. We just remodeled our bathrooms, and you really got to see. These are the coolest bathrooms, right?" And I'd try to stall them, and everybody in the kitchen would start putting their hats on, and those. This is a while ago, so putting them paper hats on that we used to have to wear, and we'd start sweeping the floor, but those aren't the things that the inspector cares about, really. I mean, nobody ever got sick from a hair in the food. Well, maybe it's a turnoff, right? But you don't really get food poisoning from that. And nobody got sick from a dirty floor, right? It's okay to have food on the floor if you're making food, right? I mean, you should see when I cook. I mean, it's a disaster. Okay, there's food all over the place. That's okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. What's the most important thing that you should kind of keep an eye on? I'm sometimes asked, in fact, I received an email yesterday. Someone was asking me, does health department schedule inspections? No, we don't, usually. And it's not because we want to sneak up on anybody. Any one of my staff members will do between 600 and 700 inspections a year of all these places, and including here. We inspect the kitchen here. In fact, I don't get out as much out of the office as I used to, but from time to time I'll go out with staff members just to, kind of keep up with things. And so the staff member that inspects the kitchen here invited me to come along, and we inspected this kitchen here a few days ago. It was very good, very good inspection. Okay, but I want to talk a little bit about dispelling some of those myths. Because it really doesn't matter if people know that we're coming or not. We don't schedule inspections because there's just too many to try to coordinate that. But sometimes the inspector will schedule an appointment for an inspection if they want to make sure that somebody's there. So for example, if they're not getting anywhere with compliance, maybe it's because they didn't get to go over the last 3 or 4 inspection reports with the chef or the person in charge. So the next time they might say, I'm going to come when you're here. And they'll schedule that to make sure that the chef is there. But quite honestly, the inspections really don't look that different. So let's talk about that for a minute. If it's not the paper hat on the head or the sweeping the floor, then what is it that the health department looks for? What is it that, let me ask you this. How long does it take to get food poisoning, first of all? Anybody know? How long? 12 hours? Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else want to guess? 6 to 8 hours. Okay. Maybe a third one. Anybody want to? 10 hours. Okay. 24 hours. You know what? You're all right. Everyone is right. You can get food poisoning anywhere from instantly, within minutes, to up to 60 days later, depending upon what type of food poisoning it is. And so that's one thing I want you to just sit on that for now, okay? Just think about that for a minute. Now, what is it? What's one of the main reasons why people get sick in a commercial food service operation? Yeah, yes, sir.
The counters aren't clean.
Counters are not clean? Okay, well, maybe there's a difference between clean and being sanitized, okay? This counter right here looks pretty clean to me. I can't tell if it's sanitized or not, okay? So that's a big difference. So maybe not being sanitized or cross-contamination could be one, but it's not one of the top 3, I would say. Yes, sir, in the back.
Food temperatures, like that.
Okay, this gentleman in the back said, what about food temperatures? And yeah, that's a good one, okay? But you have to know how to properly check temperatures. And I'll tell you, sometimes when I'm out in the field, if somebody sees me that knows me on the 16th Street Mall or whatever, sometimes they'll stop me and they'll say, hey, Bob, how's it going? I got to tell you that I saw this place, this restaurant I went into on East Colfax, and man, that was in rough shape. The floors were dirty, the walls were dirty, everything was dirty. Don't you guys go in there? How can they possibly be open? Well, having a dirty restaurant, don't get me wrong on this. Having a dirty restaurant, that's not cool. It's not acceptable. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most dangerous place to eat at. Clean places can be much more dangerous than the place that needs a little cleaning. Okay? And this is why. This gentleman in the back said temperatures are one of the most important things. Okay? You can walk into a breakfast-style restaurant that just cooks things and serves things. They might cook the eggs and serve them, and it's just cook and serve. And that's a pretty safe place. But maybe it's a little rough in terms of a lack of cleaning, right? But what about the place that you go into, and maybe it's a Mexican-style restaurant, and I'm not picking on any ethnicity or anything, but it's the nature of the food that might make it a little bit more unsafe than the breakfast place. You see, when you walk into a Mexican-style restaurant and you order a burrito with beans in it, do you think they make those beans right away? No. Because you can't make it takes a while to make those things, right? To make refried beans. So a lot of full-service restaurants, like Mexican-style restaurants, they will make beans sometimes in 50-gallon containers. So if that's a huge container of refried beans, and I only need 10 gallons of beans for that day that I made them, what am I going to do with the other 40 gallons of beans? What do I have to do? What? Throw them away? No, I just made them. Pretty fresh. This gentleman back here said use it for the next day. But if I'm going to use it for the next day, what do I have to do? I got to refrigerate it, right? So I'm going to take these beans that I just made, and we know that bacteria multiplies between 135 degrees and 41 degrees, right? That's the danger zone. Y'all probably heard of that, right? So if I'm going to take these 40 gallons of leftover beans, I've got to cool them down, right? I can't just stick them in the refrigerator. So I have to get them from 135 degrees or more if it's hotter than that. And I have to get it down to 41 degrees within 6 hours. Okay? Now, it's the next day, and I need some more beans. So I go to the refrigerator and I grab out 10 more gallons out of this 40 gallons that's left over. But before I use them, what do I have to do? What? I have to heat it up, right? So I'm going to take these beans and I'm going to reheat it up, heat it up again. Now it's supposed to reach 165 degrees in 2 hours. And then I put it on the steam table where it can drop below 165 but not below 135 because that's when things are going to start growing. Now what if I have a slow day and I didn't use these 10 gallons of beans here and I've got some left over now? What am I going to do? What do I need to do with that? Well, ideally, but there's no regulation that says you have to throw it away. So if I'm going to use that, it's a leftover, that's money. Okay? If I'm going to use that, what do I have to do with it? I have to cool it down again. And I have to do that within 6 hours again. Now the next day I go back in and I take that leftover and I want to use that up first, hopefully, right? But before I put it back on the steam table, what do I have to do? I have to reheat that again. And I have to do that within 6 hours, or 2 hours, excuse me. So you can see that the breakfast style place that has a kind of a cook and serve menu, you know, maybe the counters are dirtier, the floor, the walls might be a little dirtier than they should be. And if it's too dirty, any of my staff members will not hesitate to close that restaurant then and there with customers in the dining room. They'll do that. They do that, okay? I shouldn't say do that, huh? Yeah, that's not good. You only really need one do there, I think. They do that. They do that. I don't think you need the do that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, probably one extra word there. I'll have to cut that out next time. Okay, so my staff members will do that. Okay? They will close restaurants. So you can walk into a full-service restaurant that looks very, very clean. But if they're not doing this properly, well, here's one section where it's going through the danger zone when they're cooking it. It's going through the danger zone again here, here, and here. And sometimes during the course of inspections, we'll see things that are on the steam table. If this 10 gallons of beans I put on the steam table, here's the water down there sometimes. Where's the warmest part, or where's the coldest part of that food now? Right here. Okay? So that's where the inspectors are going to check. You see, the law states that anything on the steam table that you might be holding to serve to a customer later on, it doesn't say it has to be 135 degrees or higher somewhere. It says it has to be 135 degrees or higher everywhere, because bacteria is going to multiply in the area where it's less than 135. So when my staff members do inspections, they're not looking for where it's hot on the steam table. They're looking for where it's cold. And that's what you should do too. That's how you should check temperatures. So my staff members will take their Thermocouple, which is just a fancy name for a thermometer. It's this thing. And they'll put it in right here. Right at the top, maybe in the top 1/4 inch or so. And sometimes that'll frustrate the chefs and the sous chefs and the kitchen managers, and they'll say, oh, come on, that's not fair. Stick that thermometer in there. You'll get 135. But we don't want to know where it's 135 degrees. We want to know where it's not 135 degrees. If I were doing an inspection and I had something on a container of ice, we all know that whatever it is that's on ice, let's say this is a container of cheese, and here is the ice, okay? And the cheese is piled up, well, maybe that's a little carried away there, but the cheese is maybe stocked up for the lunch rush. Now, the law states that all of this cheese has to be 41 degrees or less throughout, not somewhere, everywhere, okay? Where's it going to be the warmest? At the top, right here. So that's where they're going to check. They're going to take their thermocouple and put it in here like this, because that's going to be nice and cold down there. They're not going to try and stick that all the way in there. If they walk into the walk-in cooler during an inspection, and let's go back to that Mexican-style restaurant where those 40 gallons of beans were left over that we didn't use that day. If they put that into the walk-in cooler in that large volume like that, that's not going to cool fast enough. I said earlier that 40 gallons has to cool within 6 hours. I can tell you it's never going to happen, especially with a thick product like that. So if the inspector walks in, he wants to know, or she wants to know, how warm is that still? If it's not down to 41 degrees and they made it yesterday, that food is going to have to get thrown away. So now they're going to look for the warmest place, right? They want to see where's the warmest place, because if that's not below 41 degrees, they're going to throw it. Where's that going to be? It'll be right here, right? That's where they're going to check the temperature, okay? All right, what if we walk into a burger-style restaurant, like a McDonald's or a Burger King or something like that, and they have these hamburgers that are about that thick, right? The real thin ones. Now, the regulations say that the inside of that burger has to be 155 degrees at a minimum, okay? Where are they going to check that? Right in the center, right there, right? Now, most kitchens use something like this. You've all seen this, right? How many people work in a kitchen right now? Okay. Well, some of you do. I don't look familiar, right? I don't? Okay, good. I always worry that I'm going to have a student that, yeah, thanks. I always worry I'm going to have a student someday that, I closed this restaurant or something like that, and like during recess he's going to beat the crap out of me or something, So, but nobody today. That's good. So if I want to check the inside of this burger, and I'm going to use this, y'all know that comes out of there, right? Yeah, that comes out of there. So I'm going to use this. How am I going to check the inside of that burger with something like this? Because this bimetallic thermometer, I'll blow this up for you here. This thermometer that I have in my hand is built like this. It's called a bimetallic thermometer because there are two wires inside this thermometer here. That's the reason for bi, meaning two, okay? There's a wire that goes from here up to there, and there's a wire that goes from here up to there. So when you check the temperature, yeah, there it is. When you check the temperature with something like this, you have to, there's a little dimple, and it's right there on this thermometer. When you check the temperature with something like this, if you want it to be accurate, this has to get into the food that far. And even then, if you're able to do that, you're getting an average temperature from this point to that point, right there. So if I'm working in a burger place, even a full-service restaurant that sells burgers, how am I going to check the temperature of this with something like this? Well, that'd be pretty tough, don't you think? Have to get that in there just like that. I don't know. I think that'd be pretty hard to do. I guess my point is this. This satisfies the law right here. If you have this and it's accurate within 2 degrees, either way of 32 in ice water, you're in compliance with having a thermometer that's accurate. But trying to check the temperatures of things with something like this is very, very difficult. And it's not uncommon, I can tell you this. It's not uncommon for places that do monitor temperatures with something like this. They think their temperatures are good, but then the inspector comes along with something like this and finds out that the temperatures aren't really that good. And now this is a thermocouple. This will read something within a fraction of a second, and it'll be very, very accurate. This is not what makes it fast. This thing here, that's just a digital readout. That's all this piece is. This is what makes it fast. This is called a microneedle. The thinner a needle is, the faster it'll read temperatures. So this thermocouple here checks the temperature right at the tip. I don't have to worry if I got it in this far or not, or, I mean, I could take this and put it just like that, right? Or if I wanted to go over here and just check the top layer of this, I could do just like that. This is very, very accurate, okay? I beat the heck out of mine. I don't use it very often because I don't do many inspections anymore, but mine is in rough shape. I remember not long ago, I was meeting one of my staff members downtown, and I brought mine along just to help them check temperatures. And when I left, I got in my car and I started driving down 15th Street. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and there my thermocouple went down the window on the outside of the car because I set it up there and just, opened up the car, and don't laugh at that. But I picked it up, and it's still accurate, okay? So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you check temperatures and what makes people sick and what doesn't. Now, here's another question for you. Why is it that maybe only one person gets sick when everybody else, or many other people anyways, ate the same thing? How could that be? I got to tell you, that is the number one defense, I guess I might say, for lack of a better word, that the chef or the kitchen manager might say when one of my staff members shows up to the restaurant and says, well, somebody called in a food poisoning complaint and they had a bean burrito. We'll stick with the bean theme here. They had a bean burrito, okay? What does the manager say? Yes, sir.
Is it a different kind of immune system?
That is one of the reasons right there, that some people get sick more than others because their immune system is weak. And I know what y'all might be thinking, oh, you mean HIV or hepatitis or something like that? Maybe, but most of the time it's something much, much less serious than that, but still would put a person in an immune-compromised state. What could make a person immune-compromised other than having a serious illness? The age. Yeah, person's age. There's something called Listeria monocytogenes, write that down, that affects people, younger kids, or pregnant moms. It hits them harder than maybe the rest of us. That might be, that falls in between that range. Okay? So their age has something to do with it. But what else? Stress. Who said that? Stress. Yeah, absolutely. Students, all of you, or many of you, could be immune compromised right now. I went to college many, many moons ago up at CSU, and I remember what it's like. I haven't forgotten. What is it about students that could make them immune compromised? I remember you got to go to school for 8 hours, you got to work for 8 hours, you got to party for 6 hours and study for 15 minutes. All of that adds up, right? All that time adds up. And so you're not sleeping maybe as much as you should be. And so you're in an immune compromised situation, right? Doesn't it feel like sometimes when you get a cold or the flu or something like that, it seems to hit when you're not sleeping very well or not sleeping enough? You ever notice that? Yeah, so it could be just that the person who called in the food poisoning complaint is the student, or is the person who's working a lot of hours and is not getting enough sleep. Or maybe they're just working 8 hours a day and they're not getting enough sleep. Okay? What else could make a person immune compromised so that they're the only ones that got sick, even though many other people ate the same thing. What? How come you look at me when you said that? I'm working on it. Okay. Yeah, they might be a little out of shape, right? Or, yeah, kind of along those lines, if they're like me, this is the worst thing to do, I know it. You nutritionists, you back me up on this, right? When I look in the mirror and I feel like I'm getting fat, I want to lose 20 pounds in a week, right? Because I can't take it. So, I get to the point where like the pleats on your pants are gone because it's too tight, or maybe even worse, like your pants are so tight the inside of your pockets are showing like that. Okay? When I get that way, I want to lose 20 pounds in a week. So I don't eat. I don't eat right. And so that would put me in an immune-compromised situation. When I used to investigate food poisoning complaints when I was an investigator, like an inspector, we always would take, and we still do, we take a 3-day food history of anybody who calls in. Because a lot of times people will complain about the last place that they ate. Why is that? Well, because when they throw up, that's what they see, right? The food of the last place that they ate. And they think, God, look at that food, made me sick, right? But many times it's not the last place that they ate. They think it is, but we know that it could be a place that they ate at 2 or 3 days ago. So we take a 3-day food history. And I remember this, even when years ago when I was an inspector, I remember this. Sometimes they'd be talking to, I think ladies are probably more prone to this than the guys, but I'm the biggest offender, so don't be offended at this. But sometimes I'll be speaking with a woman who wants to file a complaint, and we'll take a 3-day food history. So I'll ask the lady, well, what did you have to eat that day before you went to the restaurant? What did you have for breakfast? Glass of water? Well, okay. What did you have for lunch? Well, I had some celery and a glass of water. Okay. And I might ask her, well, why are you not, you didn't eat much that day? And she might say, well, because I knew I was going to go out and eat more that night because I was going to go out to eat. And so that could make a person immune compromised too, right? Nutritionists? Am I right or am I right? Okay. So you got to understand that when one person calls in, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. You got to remember too that a lot of people don't call in because they think they have what? They think they have the stomach flu, right? You know, that 24-hour thing that makes you have to stay at home for a while, mainly in one room. You call that the stomach flu, right? That, you know, you get a lot of nausea, low-grade fever, vomiting. I mean, things are shooting out everywhere, and it's awful, right? But guess what? What we refer to as the stomach flu, that's actually norovirus. That's what that's called, norovirus. And I'm going to probably shock you here. It's going to be hard for you to believe, but norovirus is food poisoning, okay? Because food poisoning is anything that is where the main route of spreading the disease is through food. That is what classifies an organism, as a foodborne illness organism, okay? Well, the stomach flu is most often passed through food. A lot of people think, well, and I thought it was you get the flu when you are standing in an elevator too close to somebody and they cough on you. But that's respiratory flu. That's different than the stomach flu, okay? So that's another reason people don't call in, because they think they have the stomach flu. In fact, I'll tell you a case I had a number of years ago. I'll never forget it. It involved a number of school teachers that got together every month from schools all over Denver, and they would talk about whatever you teachers talk about at their meeting. And every month they would have their meeting catered from a place in Denver. Well, one month they received some food from a caterer who was unlicensed, and the caterer was making the food at home, which is illegal, of course, and they weren't, this person wasn't really in compliance with everything else that goes along with food safety, and there was a problem with the food. There were over 50 school teachers that got together. Over 30 of them became ill from that food. That's a pretty good attack rate, okay? And not everybody's going to get sick, but that's a pretty good attack rate right there. Guess how many people called us? No one. No one called us. Because the incubation period after they ate the food, and the incubation period is the length of time it takes them to become ill, the meeting was over before anybody became ill. So they all got ill at home the next day or later that night. Nobody called us until they got together again the next month. And they start talking to each other, right? How they get on the subject of diarrhea, I don't know. But they start talking to each other, and they say, oh, you had it too, and you did too, and you did. That couldn't have been the stomach flu. The stomach flu doesn't hit over 30 people all at the same time. It must have been the food. Then they called us, okay, a month later. That happens a lot. People won't call in because they think they have the stomach flu. But the stomach flu is food poisoning. I saw a hand go up somewhere. Somebody have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, they had called us. Many times, I had said earlier, in Denver, we investigate every complaint, even if only one person calls in, because we know there could be many other that called and complained to the restaurant. I've had cases like that where one person calls in, I get to the restaurant, and a lot of people have called to the restaurant. And even some people that work at the restaurant were sick. Okay? So that's another myth about food poisoning is why is it that only one person can get sick? There's another reason outside of just being immune compromised. What could that be? I'm sorry? Oh, allergies. Yes. Yeah, that's a kind of a very narrow window in terms of the type of food poisoning complaint as an allergy, but usually we can sort that out. Allergies most of the time aren't like GI symptom type of food poisonings, and so we usually can hone in pretty quickly if it's an allergy. But that, you're right. I mean, that could isolate it to one person. Well, why else might just only one person get sick?
I was going to say, I didn't tell them, but I don't want to say the only thing. I was going to say region, depending on the region you're in, too. Could you been to, like, Vietnam, you could have constantly there, or the different regions you've been to?
I will tell you that this gentleman here said maybe it's because of the region that you're from, or maybe it's related to travel. There's some recent travel. That's one of the questions that we ask when we conduct an interview. If somebody calls in and says they have food poisoning, we'll ask them about that. We ask them about their pets, about any parties they've been to. Okay? But there's something else that we're forgetting here, and it has to do with temperatures. Oh, yeah, way in the back there.
They got the bad part of the food.
Yes, this young lady back here said maybe the person who got sick got the bad part of the food. I'm going to share something with you. Salmonella, everybody knows what salmonella is, right? It's a type of food poisoning, right? Okay. It only takes about 100 cells of salmonella to make a person get salmonella food poisoning. 100 cells. That's it. That might seem like a lot. You can fit 100 cells of salmonella on the head of a pin. So when you think about a piece of chicken that has enough salmonella on it to cause somebody to become ill, that could be a portion of that chicken that is the size of a head of a pin. Okay? That's all. You can have two people eating off the same piece of chicken, and one person gets salmonella and the other person not. Because the person who got the salmonella is the person who maybe ate a little closer to the bone where it was uncooked. So the idea of having a piece of chicken that has salmonella on it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to glow in the dark when you shut the lights off. It could be a very, very small portion. And like I said, you can have two people, and that's a real mind block for people who call our office and they want to file a complaint. This happens a lot. Sometimes the husband will call in and file a complaint that his wife is sick. Is she still sick? So he calls in the complaint. Or the wife will call in for the husband because he's still sick, so she calls in the complaint. And we'll start taking that food history that I mentioned earlier. And many times the complainants will say, well, we had this and this and this, but don't worry about this one piece of thing that we had because we shared that, and my husband got sick and I didn't. I ate some of the chicken off his plate, but I didn't get sick and he did, so it's not the chicken. That means absolutely nothing to us, the fact that they both ate off that chicken and only he got sick. By the way, ladies, what's up with that? Why are you always eating off her plate? You guys, isn't that the truth? I tell you, my wife, she always does that. You know this, Professor, right? It's just a little pet peeve I have. When we first met many years ago, like our first date, and the waiter comes over and asks if we want to have dessert. Well, look at me. I mean, I don't skip dessert, right? So I said, well, yeah, I'll have some, okay? What does my wife say? No, I'll just have some of yours. Yeah, so she says. Of course, it's our first date, so what do I have to say? Oh, yeah, that'd be sweet. Yeah, we can share. Now I'm like, get your own. Okay? So you have to remember that, this idea of two people eating off the same plate doesn't mean anything. And I want to go back to what that young lady said in the back. Infective doses, or the amount of bacteria it takes to make a person sick, can be very isolated in the food in this way too. Remember earlier I said I used to work at Taco Bell. And now years ago when I worked at Taco Bell, they weren't 24-hour operations like they are now. We used to close at about 2 o'clock in the morning on Friday and Saturday night. And so as it got later and later in the evening, as we were starting to get low on refried beans, we wouldn't make more, right? Because that's just another leftover that we'd have to cool down, and nobody wanted to do that. So we would let it just kind of run out, hoping that we would not get anybody coming in at 1:55 in the morning, which always happened on Friday and Saturday night in a college town, right? And so somebody would come in at 1:55 in the morning, just before we close, and they want to have a bean burrito or anything that has beans in it. Well, all we had left was this nasty, gnarly, crusty stuff on the side of the pan here. So what did we do? I can tell you this because statute of limitations, right? This is a long time ago. I can't get in trouble for this. What did we do? We'd take a spatula and we would scrape that crap off of there, throw it in a tortilla, put a little extra sauce on it to cover up the crunchiness, right? Roll it up and call it a bean burrito and serve it up to this guy, right? Now, hey, I was young, okay? I wouldn't do that now. So if the one person who goes in at 1:55 in the morning and eats that bean burrito right there and gets sick and calls the health department, and somebody from the health department goes to that Taco Bell, and the inspector shows up to the Taco Bell and says, hey, we have a complaint. Somebody came in at 1:55 in the morning and they had a bean burrito and they think they got sick. What does the manager of that restaurant say? We served 500 bean burritos here that day. One person? Really? That's impossible. Well, it's not because of things like that. Okay? So infective doses are very, very isolated within the food. People have immune systems that vary. People don't call in. So my overall point is this. If one person calls in, you got to take it seriously because there could be many others who are sick and didn't call, or it could be that maybe that person's immune compromised, or it could be that maybe that person ate at this Taco Bell at 1:55 in the morning. Okay? All right, any questions about any of that so far? All right, let's talk a little bit about hand washing. There's a lot of misconceptions about hand washing. That's another huge factor related to the incidence of food poisoning. Now, this is really sanitation 101, I got to tell you. You should know this. When you're out in the industry and you're in charge and an inspector comes up to you and says, hey, chef, or whatever your title is, maybe you're a manager or what have you, if they're going over the report with you and they say, hey, I happen to know one of your cooks went over to the hand sink and he just rinsed his hands off, he didn't use soap, and he has to use soap. Okay? So you go to your employee and you tell your employee, hey, there's a violation now, a critical violation on our inspection report because he didn't use soap. The inspector saw that and wrote that down. You have to use soap. What if your cook says to you, why?
Fired.
What?
Man, you got some hardcore students in here, man. I'll tell you what. Yeah. Jeez. Well, hopefully somebody wouldn't get fired. But What if they ask you that? You're in charge. They're asking you, why do I have to use soap? I rinse my hands off vigorously with pretty warm water.
It's sanitary reasons.
For sanitary reasons? You mean because soap kills bacteria? Soap does not kill bacteria. I'm here to tell you that. I hear that all the time, that people in the food industry think you have to wash your hands with soap because it kills bacteria. Soap will not kill bacteria. So why do you have to use soap? You ought to know this. I'll tell you, if any one of my inspectors wasn't able to tell you this during the course of inspection, fired, right? Well, maybe I'd give them a warning first, but so why the soap? What? Yes, sir.
Because it gets it off your hand.
Yes. This gentleman back here said because soap gets whatever is on your hands off your hands. Soap is a surfactant. Okay, surfactants are any chemical agent that loosens surface tension between two objects. In this case, we're trying to loosen the surface tension between our hand and whatever is on our hand, like bacteria, right? So we use soap because it makes things on our hand come off easier. It will not kill what is on our hands. Now, why the hot water then? What if the inspector says to you, I saw your staff member wash his hands and he used soap, which I appreciate, but when I went over to turn on the hand sink, I had to wait like 15, 20 seconds for hot water to come out, so he must have used cold water. He didn't use hot water. That's also going to fall on the red side of the inspection page, okay? That's a critical violation too. So if you go to your cook and you say, hey, inspector saw you didn't use hot water, you know, you have to use hot water, and your cook says to you, why? I use soap. What are you going to tell him? Why do you have to use hot water? Yes, sir, in the back.
Opens up the pores of your hand.
Yes. You are the only one student that I've spoken with in quite a while that had the answer to that. What do we have for him? This is a nice camera here. You should take this, okay, when you go. You won't mind. Soap, or not soap, hot water opens up the pores on your hands. Now, if you look at your hand, probably looks a lot like this one, you might be thinking, those pores are pretty small. How much bacteria can you really fit in the pores of your hands? Well, remember earlier I said you could fit 100 cells of salmonella on the head of a pin. So if you look at all the pores on your hands or even the cracks in your hands, you can fit a lot of bacteria in there. So the whole idea of using warm water is just to open that up. I can remember when I was a kid, I used to watch my mom wash her face twice every night. I didn't get it, right? I never understood that. I wouldn't wash my face once when I was a kid, much less brush my teeth, right? She'd wash it twice. Why'd she do that? She'd wash with warm water first to open up the pores on her face, and then she'd wash with cold water. What would the cold water do then? Close them back up. So what happens if the cook goes over to the hand sink and uses cold water? It's going to close up the pores on his hands. So you can use soap all day and not get everything off of there, right? Because everything is tightened up. Okay? Do you ever go outside like on a cold day? Well, that's kind of a stupid question. I'm sure everybody's gone outside on a cold day, right? Sometimes what happens to your hands? Get real small and kind of tight. And do you ever notice that? Yes. Yeah. Everything's closing up. Cold water does the same thing. What's required at the hand sink is 100 degrees. That's all. 100 degrees will open up the pores on your hand. Sometimes students will think, well, the hot water will kill the bacteria. Hot water coming out of this hand sink will never be hot enough to kill what's on your hands because you have to wash your hands for 20 seconds. 165 degrees would kill salmonella. That's what chicken's required to be cooked to, is 165 degrees, right? Okay. How long do you think you could hold your hands under this faucet here if the water were 165 degrees? Not even a couple of seconds, right? So there's another myth for you that we just busted. Okay? Any questions about that?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so you were talking earlier about how you have
you look at somebody's food history for 3 days.
Yes.
But they have the possibility of getting sick over like 60 days based on their immune system.
Yes.
So how do you narrow that down, I guess? How do you determine 3 days is the limit?
Yeah, why 3 days?
Yeah.
Well, for a couple of reasons. Because the majority of, even though there are some foodborne illness bacteria or viruses that have a very long incubation period, like hepatitis, could be 2 months, okay? The majority of them will fall within 3 days. There are some with a couple of weeks or stuff like that. But here's how we sort through that. We take the 3-day food history because that's going to cover the majority of the foodborne illnesses. The other quirky ones, like hepatitis and the ones that are longer, those we try to get at through that interview that we do. Like, have you had any shellfish lately? Because the symptoms look a lot like hepatitis, and shellfish can contribute to hepatitis, right? Or have you done any travel recently? Because that could be a source of the illness based on the symptoms. This looks like not one that falls in that 3-day food history, but one of those quirky ones. So that's going to come out during the interview process. Okay, good question. Yes?
In terms of restaurant-based foodborne illnesses and home-based, would you say they're fairly equal, or?
Boy, that's a. This young lady here said, "What's the incidence of home-based foodborne illness versus commercial foodborne illness?" It's a very good question, very difficult one to answer, because a lot of times foodborne illness isn't confirmed. But I will tell you that there are a fair number, based on what the information that is given to us, where the inspectors will have to call the complainant back and say, "Sir, or based on the information that you've given me, we've checked out the restaurant. Things seem to be checking out okay there, but based on your incubation period, your symptoms, it looks like you may have gotten sick from home." Remember that 3-day food history I talked about? It's not just what commercial restaurants have you eaten at in the last 3 days. It's what have you eaten at in the last 3 days, including from home. And unfortunately, a lot of people will make themselves sick at home. Or they will do something at a restaurant that makes them sick at no fault of the restaurant. Okay? Let me give you an example. When my kids were younger, they're all grown up and off on their own now. But when they were younger, we'd go to a fast food restaurant sometimes because that's what they like. And do you ever go to a fast food restaurant and you like Wendy's or McDonald's or Taco Bell, something like that, and you don't get to go right up to the cash register? Sometimes you have to walk through this thing like this, this. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. This metal thing that kind of guides the line, keeps everybody together, in one line. Yeah. Everybody and their dog has touched that pole all day long. So when people go out to restaurants and they get in that line, what do? They go like this, touching the pole all the way till they get the register. Then they eat their food, right? But do they wash their hands before they eat the food? No. A lot of people forget to wash their hands when they eat out. And so everything that they touched before they ate out, they're going to eat off their hands, especially if it's the type of food where you're not using forks and that sort of thing. I remember when I would take my little son, he's like 4 or 5 years old, something like that. We'd be waiting in line, and the line's not moving, and I'd look down, and what's he doing? One of these. He's got his mouth on there just waiting, you're resting his head like that, and I look down like, don't do that, So I thought I saw a hand go up. Yes, right here.
Hand sanitizer. Usually before I eat out, I always have hand sanitizer and on my hands, because sometimes you just can't wash your hands out.
Good point.
What do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. This young lady's question was, what about hand sanitizers? In certain situations, it's better than nothing, but I can tell you what the law says. The law states that hand sanitizers can be used in addition to hand washing with soap. The problem with hand sanitizers is this. It'll list all of the types of bacteria that it will kill on the back, but it's not getting everything. Okay, it doesn't kill everything. The other problem with hand sanitizers is that the sanitizer part of the hand sanitizer is usually in some type of a gel, right? It's the alcohol that's in that gel that tries to kill what's on our hands. But once that alcohol dissipates off our hands, what's left on our hand then? The gel. The gel is still there, right? So if you're working in a commercial kitchen and all you're using is a gel-based hand sanitizer, and then you're touching other things, that gel is still there. So anything you touch is now embedded into that gel, and it makes it harder to wash off. The other thing is that alcohol-based sanitizers can dry out the hands quite a bit. And so if you get a lot of cracks in your hands and things like that, then it's more places for bacteria to harbor then. So the quick answer is, if that's still possible, you can use them, but not in place of using soap. You know, on a picnic or something like that, hey, I would use it too, because it's all you have. Okay? Yes.
So I've spent a lot of time in New York, and they've used a grading system. And I was just wondering if Colorado would ever progress to that, or if it's even worse.
Probably not on my watch, I would say. I'm not a big fan of grading systems, and I'll tell you why. I think that I would rather just provide the facts. Just provide what's on the inspection report. People can decide if they want to eat there or not. Okay? And it's really kind of funny that, I've heard people say over the years, well, I don't really care if they wash their hands that much, but I'm not going to eat where they have cockroaches. I'm not going to eat there. But cockroaches isn't in the top 5 things that cause food poisoning. Hand washing is. So, really things mean different types of violations mean different things to different people. And I would rather us and you can look on our website, and any of the inspection reports that we do are on the website, and you can decide based on the nature of the violations, is that some place that you want to eat at or not. The other thing that I'm a little concerned about is that I've seen some grading systems where you get an A, or you get a B, or you get a C, something like that. Well, what if a place gets an A, but the next day something goes wrong? You can have something go wrong in some of the best run places. The last thing I want is for a citizen calling in and saying, I've got food poisoning, and you gave them an A. That's why I ate there, because you gave them an A. Those types of things, or grading systems, are considered, I think, by some as endorsements. And I would rather stay away from that and just provide the inspection reports and let people decide where they want to eat. I do a fair amount of travel, and I was in another jurisdiction outside of our state, and they had a grading system there. And I was in that city for quite some time, and I ate out a fair amount because I was traveling. And I noticed that every restaurant had an A. And yet, doing what I do for a living, I was seeing things that would indicate maybe they should have gotten something less than an A. But while I was out there, I met with the director, my counterpart for that jurisdiction. And she's a good friend of mine, and I had asked her, hey, what's up with this, what's up with the grading system here? It seems like everybody gets an A. And she said, well, everybody starts out with an A. And if they get too many violations, they will get a B and get closed. And so we will close them if they have too many violations, and they will put up a B. Okay? Now, I don't know about you, but a B seems pretty good to me, but they got closed. Okay? The other question I have is, if they're closed, who's seeing the B? Right? And even if they did peek through the window wondering what's going on, and they do see the B, they're going to think, well, it's not a health department issue because they got a B on their last inspection, right? Now, here's the kicker. So I asked her, well, how do they get an A back? And my friend said, well, they have to go back. The inspector has to go back and do an inspection, and everything has to look good before they can open back up. But do you have a problem with that? Everything has to look good before they open back up. So they're closed. So they're doing an inspection when the place is closed. Nobody's washing their hands because nobody's there. None of the temperatures are off because nothing's on the steam table. The place is closed. So they're going to get an A, right? And then they get to open back up again. That just doesn't make sense to me. So I have a problem with grading systems. So there was a question in the back. No? Okay. All right. So anybody have any questions about that before I give a shameless plug to consider working for the Department of Health? Okay. Let me just share a couple of things with you. We've got the Department of Health is pretty diverse. In our department, there are many different divisions. Division of Public Health Inspections. There is Animal Control. Everybody knows what that is, right? There's a division called Community Health, where the staff members in that division, they educate the public on how to keep themselves maybe from getting sick and how to eat healthier. And even the coroner's office, believe it or not, the coroner's office is in the Department of Health. I never got that because it always seemed like, isn't it kind of too late at that point, you know? But anyways, so it's pretty diverse. In the agency that I oversee within the Department of Health, Public Health Inspections, I have inspectors who inspect restaurants and housing and body art and emergency medical vehicles and assisted living residences and swimming pools and marijuana, and they investigate noise complaints and on and on. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I get a lot of staff members sometimes who want to change between one program and another because I've been doing it for a number of years. But most of you, if you were interested, I would suggest you probably would want to start out as a public health investigator in the food safety program. Okay? I'd encourage you to, a lot of students don't think that they would qualify to do something like that, and so they seem kind of surprised that a degree in maybe nutrition would qualify as a health inspector. But as I said earlier, you know, we find that people who've had degrees in microbiology and biology, historically we used to hire for that, they wouldn't stay because they didn't have a passion for the food industry like all of you might in some arena. Okay? Those are the ones that stay. And so we encourage students who are pursuing degrees in some arena in the food safety or in the food industry to consider maybe working as a regulator. They make the best inspectors, I can tell you, because they understand, maybe they've worked in restaurants, the number you put your hand up and you work in restaurants, they make the best inspectors because they understand kitchen operations. Okay? So you might wonder, well, what is that like? Well, most of my staff members, quite honestly, I don't know where they are at any point in time. A lot of them start their day at home, and they end their day at home. They all get a certain district in Denver, and they're responsible for getting the inspections done and the education done and enforcement and closing restaurants if they have to and everything that goes along with trying to get restaurateurs to comply. And I will say this with the camera rolling here, Denver does overall a very good job. The hospitality industry does. But there are places that do present some challenges for us. That's the inspector's job to bring them into compliance. Somebody asked me a couple of days ago, how many inspections does an inspector do in a day? Sometimes none. Maybe they're just investigating complaints. Maybe they're just offering technical assistance to restaurants who've had problems on their last inspection. It's kind of like, I remember when I interviewed for my position as an investigator a while back, somebody explained it to me very well. They said it's kind of like running your own business because nobody really oversees what you're doing or nobody's watching over your shoulder. You get this area of town and you set your own schedule and decide which places are going to be inspected in what order that month, and it's kind of cool that way. I have inspectors that work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I have some that work 9-hour days and take every other Friday off. I have some that work 10-hour days and take 3 days off a week. I don't care when they start or when they finish. What I care about is that they get the job done and they do everything they can to bring restaurants into compliance. That's what I care about. They're not graded on how many, or evaluated, I should say. Their performance has nothing to do with how many fines are assessed in their district or how much revenue is collected from that or how many restaurants they close. They're evaluated on how well they do communicating to the restaurateurs in their district to bring them into compliance. That's the number one goal there. Okay? All right. So, yes, sir.
Why do you talk about noise complaints you investigate? Why is that?
Why do we investigate noise complaints? Yeah. Public health inspections, the agency that I oversee, we enforce about 8 or 9 different chapters of the Denver Municipal Code. That's probably more than any other agency, with the exception of maybe the police department. The health department regulates, sometimes it seems like life. We regulate life. But it's just one of those chapters that the health department oversees, because if there's too much noise at night, I mean, you ever get woken up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back to sleep? I just said earlier, not sleeping is a health issue, not sleeping well, right? So the health department investigates that. Yes, ma'am?
I was told one time that roaches are considered a health issue. Is that true?
Was your question, what?
Yeah. I had to call and complain about a bug issue.
Okay.
And I was told that roaches aren't considered a health issue. So is that true in restaurants and homes?
No, I didn't say roaches or any other insect couldn't spread disease earlier. I said it's not one of the leading causes. Cockroaches can spread disease. There's no doubt about that. Maybe not as much as other insects, and they're kind of creepier in my opinion. But you know what spreads more disease than cockroaches? No? Flies. Yeah, flies. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. They think, when you see a restaurant, I tell you, I will not eat in a restaurant where I see a lot of flies. I've walked out. Because, first of all, flies are much more mobile than cockroaches are. They will be on the dumpster or out in the alley, on some pile in the alley, and then fly in the back door and land on a cutting board or on food. And not to get too graphic here, but I don't know if you realize this or not, but flies can't chew food. They don't have any teeth. They can't chew food. So what they do is they vomit on the food, and then the enzymes and the things that they vomit onto the food, that breaks the food down into a liquid, so then they can suck it back up. That's how they eat. Okay? So you can imagine what's left when they're done eating. So they can spread bacteria quite a bit. I know cockroaches are much more creepy, but flies are much more of a problem.
So on that note, how many, in your interpretation, is too many flies in a restaurant, in your opinion?
On too many flies? That's true with a lot of violations. How much is, at what point are they out of compliance with the intent of the regulations? Is one fly a problem? It's a judgment call on the part of the inspector. I would say if I was doing an inspection and I saw that the fly was in the storeroom, landing on things that are covered, probably cut them some slack on that. If I saw that fly was landing on the meats that are made for sandwiches and that aren't going to be cooked afterwards, I'd say that fly is a bigger problem. And I'd probably write it down. So there's a lot that goes into, the inspectors, I trust their judgment on when they feel it's important enough to call something, and it's not just related to how many bugs is one too many bug. It's, things on the refrigerator have to be 41 degrees. What if it's 43? What if it's 44? What if, 5 degrees off? What if it's 5 degrees off? Is that a big deal or not? Maybe it depends on the kind of food that it is, and is it going to be cooked afterwards, and how long it's been there. So there's just a lot of, there's a lot. But all of our staff members would be taught those things so that they could make those decisions out in the field. Okay? All right. Does anybody have any questions for me regarding some of the myths that we talked about, or what's it like to be an inspector, or anything like that? We recently hired 3 people, and the 3 that I'm thinking of all came from this school. Okay.
Have they just graduated?
One is an intern because she has not graduated yet. Another one started as an intern, and when she graduated, we immediately promoted her from intern to Public Health Investigator 1, which is an entry-level position. And then the other one was a graduate. I believe that I don't do much of the hiring. The program managers do that. I believe that one is a hospitality management degree, and I believe the other two are nutrition. And we hired a student from CSU. I go up to CSU as well and talk to the students up there, and she applied, and we're happy to have her. They're all doing a great job. So, any other questions before I share one more thing with you? Yes?
So you said soap and hot water don't kill the bacteria, right?
Yeah, generally not.
So what does when you wash your hands?
Nothing really. The whole idea of when you wash your hands, the idea there is not to kill what's on your hands, because you can't kill what's on your hands, at least not with 100-degree water coming out of the tap. That it's not hot enough. Okay, so the whole idea is just to get it off your hands. Okay. Yes.
So I work for Starbucks, and we have Plaza come in. That, I believe they're separate from you guys.
Yes.
Now, are they the same standard and level, and they go through the same exact things as you? I mean, we do our own Plaza evaluations as well, and they seem pretty in-depth. And I mean, they even go off of the build-up on the floor, and they're looking at our floors. So are they the same standard and the same as you guys?
You know, it's hard for me to speak to that because I don't really know what they look at. I will tell you that Starbucks, in my opinion, does a very good job. You know, it's a low-risk place. You know, it's pretty limited in what they do there. Huge Starbucks fan, though, by the way. But yeah, they're you know, I don't know what their independent QA people look at. They're probably looking at things that we're not going to care about. You know, like. Maybe you could answer this, but do they look, you know, did the person at the register smile? Or do they do that or no?
No, it's all of what you went over today, and
Yeah.
when they washing their hands, if they touch their apron.
Yeah. Well, that's all very similar. I will tell you that many years ago I was doing an inspection at another chain, and their independent inspector happened to be there when I went in there. And that person left the report for them and left, and I did my inspection right after they had left. And I asked if I could see their inspection report from their independent inspector, and I saw it, and there was nothing critical on there, including the gentleman who was making sandwiches with a Band-Aid on his finger. So... yeah, so it's hard to say, you know, maybe that independent inspector should have caught that. Maybe that's something he's supposed to be looking for, but he just missed it. By the way, when you are in charge at a restaurant, I would encourage you to stock your first aid kits with blue bandages, okay? Not the bandages that you might buy at King Soopers, or because it's easy for you to see it, okay? And you can tell the person, your cook, if they got a blue bandage on their finger, that's a very easy thing to pick out versus those skin-colored bandages. It's very easy to miss that. Okay? Yes?
On menus, like whether it's sushi or steaks cooked to different dentists, how far does a disclaimer saying, like, eating raw meat, seafood can give you illness, like how far does that allow for restaurants in terms of, like, liability?
Okay, yeah, this lady's question here was, how do the regulations apply to restaurants that serve things raw or undercooked, like sushi? If they put a disclaimer on the menu, does that protect them from liability? Did I get that right? Yeah. And, you know, I can tell you that it probably helps, but I would never say that in itself would keep somebody from suing or trying to sue a restaurant. And, you know, I quite honestly, the lawsuits that I've seen, it's very difficult to prove food poisoning came from a particular restaurant unless you have everything lined up. But most of the time, when it goes to a lawsuit, the person who filed the complaint, even though it's going to be very difficult to prove, they get money. Why?
Because they just want the spot to go away.
It's cheaper, right? It's cheaper than to pay an attorney to go to court. So, you know, that's a difficult question to answer. I would say that it helps. I'm not an attorney. It would help. It's required to have a disclaimer on the menu now is required if you're serving things undercooked. Okay. So, other questions? Yes.
How much pushback does a food inspector get from
a restaurant manager if they get a bad report?
You know, you have to be, I will admit, you have to be a little thick-skinned sometimes. Most people want to do the right thing, and they're, they don't give the inspector a hard time because they know that that's not going to work out in their favor. But there are some that will give the inspector a hard time. There are some restaurateurs who will say, you can't come in here at lunch. We're busy. But none of my staff members get 3 or 4 hours off for lunch. Okay, so some restaurants are going to get inspected at 11:30 or 12 or 12:30. Now we encourage them not to inspect the same restaurant all the time at 12 because we want to mix it up a little bit and inspect at different times because you see different things at different times. They are also asked, well, they're not asked. I mean, it's a requirement. They are not to do an inspection when it's busy in a way that impacts their operation. They have to stay out of the way. Okay.
So how did they do that if they're doing it around lunchtime then?
Well, a lot of times what they'll do, or what I would do when I went into a restaurant around lunchtime, if it was just getting ready to get busy, I would try to get on the cook line and do what I needed to do there and get out of the way before it heats up. Or I would wait until it died down. And sometimes, although if I was asked to come back on another day, I generally wouldn't do that. I would do the inspection, but if they were too busy for me to go over it with the manager, I would come back because the report's already done at that time. But sometimes it doesn't happen much, but sometimes restaurateurs will just refuse an inspection, and that's a $2,000 fine. So, yes.
Can you guys ever go in there stealth mode, never tell them who you are, just kind of go in as a consumer? You're just there to eat lunch, and then you see things, and then you're able to say, actually, I'm from, you're violating.
Yeah.
Are you guys able to do that? Is that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they will do that. Now, most of the time when something like that is going to be done, it's because they want to see what things are like before they talk to the manager, and then everybody knows that the inspector's there. So, for example, if the complaint about a restaurant is, well, they're not washing their hands, okay? Well, if the inspector walks in and says, hey, I'm with the health department, and that spreads like wildfire through the kitchen. Everybody's washing their hands all the time, right? Even when they don't need to. And that might not be an accurate picture of the way things really are. And so the inspector might sometimes just kind of observe. And sometimes that's by default because they might just be standing behind everybody else who's in line to get up to the counter, what have you, and they don't want to interrupt that. So they'll just stand in line and they'll watch until they get up there and they'll say, I'm with the health department. I need to come around and take a look. Okay? But like I said earlier, most things that are serious can't correct right away anyways. Improper cooling of food is one of the leading causes of making a large group of people sick. You can imagine if you cool 40 pounds of beans improperly, that's 40 pounds beans worth of people getting sick, right? And so that's one of the leading causes of a lot of people getting sick. But in all of the times I've done an inspection, I've done thousands of inspections, and I've been stalled sometimes, and I can hear pans rattling back there while they're trying to keep me out in the lot. I don't care, because not one time have I ever heard somebody from the kitchen yell, my God, the health inspector here is quick, let's develop a faster way to cool our food before he comes back, right? They don't do that. What they do is they put their hats on and they start sweeping the floor, okay? So you should know, when you get out into the field and you're in charge, use your inspector to help you. I mean that. I'm sincere about that. Find out who your inspector is. And I can tell you if it's in Denver and you ask them, hey, would you come out and just kind of walk through the kitchen, maybe unarmed, and just tell us how you think we're doing? They love that stuff. They would rather do that than walk in after the food program manager or myself sent them a letter saying they got a fine, right? Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir.
How long on average, I know it probably depends on the restaurant, but how long does it take to inspect a restaurant?
Yeah, this gentleman's question is how long does it take to do an inspection? Just depends. 7-Eleven, 30 minutes maybe. The Brown Palace or a full-service place like that could be all day if the inspector's going to do every kitchen that's in there. It just depends. So, yes, sir.
Just like in a given restaurant, how often are you inspecting them?
Can you repeat that for me? Oh, how often? His question is, how often do you do inspections? It depends upon the risk of the restaurant. And I don't mean their level of compliance. I mean what's on their menu. If it's a place that's doing a lot of cooling and reheating and cooling and reheating, that's going to be a high-risk facility. They're going to get inspected at least twice a year. A medium-risk facility is once a year. A low that's like Taco Bell or that's pretty low risk. In fact, I got a theory that you can't get food poisoning from Taco Bell because it's not really food anymore, right? It's this. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but the beans come in a container or a box, and they just add hot water to it and rehydrate them. So it's a pretty safe operation, quite honestly. And then a low-risk facility as bars and things like that, once every 18 months or something like that. Now, those are minimums. If they have a high, and that's based on, again, the nature of the operation. Then the number of inspections goes up from that based on their compliance. So we've got restaurants that we inspect every month just because they have so many problems. But again, overall, I think Denver does a very good job. Denver has a lower rate of critical violations per inspection than many of our counterparts outside of the city of Denver, and that's because Denver operates under its own municipal code, meaning that our inspectors can close restaurants easier, issue fines, they carry ticket books and write tickets, much like a police officer would to court, whereas outside the city of Denver, they can't do that. So, and it plays out in terms of violations per inspection. Yeah, go ahead.
So do you ever have to interact with the cops at all?
Sometimes. Not very often, but sometimes. More so in like the residential health program, but sometimes in the food program too, but not very often. Yeah. So, any other questions for me? Yes.
What's the biggest high-risk inspection you've ever done?
Oh, yeah. Her question was, what's the biggest high-risk inspection I've ever done? It's been a long time since I've done an inspection. A couple of days ago, somebody asked me, what's the worst thing I've ever seen? Would that work for you? Yeah. Okay. Years ago, I was inspecting a restaurant. It's over on Broadway here, and because this one's kind of rough, I won't say the name of it with the camera rolling here, but I went in to do an inspection, and I had my thermometer here, and I was checking temperatures of things that were on the cold table. And so I was standing, it was a diner-style restaurant, and if this is the cold table here, I was checking temperatures, leaning over, doing that, And because I was leaning over, at one point I put my hand here, and there was a wall, like a partition, that was between the refrigerator and the counter where all the customers sat on the other side. And I put my hand on this little wall partition, and I was going like this, checking temperatures. And on the top of this wall partition, there was a metal cap, like a rim on top of that wall that kind of protected it from falling apart, I guess. And it was loose, though. And so when I put my hand on it like that, it rattled. And when it rattled, all kinds of cockroaches came running out of there, okay? I mean, fat ones, skinny, happy, sassy, all kinds of roaches. I mean, they were having a good time. And so my hand was still there. I didn't see it right away, and I'm checking my thermometer. And when you get like a tickle on your hand or something, and you look down and you see a spider on you or something, like you do a very unflattering, you kind of, you're trying to shake them off, and they got a couple of days off. The problem was pretty bad. I went into the back kitchen, and I took their Betty Crocker cookbook. It's a real nice place. I took their cookbook, and I do you mind? I kind of went like this with it. Knowing what I know about roaches, they like to get in paper and tight places, and they like glue on bindings of books, and the glue that holds this cove base to the perimeter of the room here. They like to eat that stuff. So I went in, I grabbed the cookbook, and I went like this, and guess what comes flying out of there? Little baby cockroaches. So you can have this. Okay. That's probably the worst thing. There is worse, though. I mean, I've got staff members who've seen worse things. I had one guy who walked into a storeroom, and the door behind him closed, and just above the door up here was a patch of cockroaches. And so when he walked in and the door closed, they all slipped off the wall onto his head. So, yeah, I told him, it's a good thing you're bald, because easier to get them off, right? So, any other questions for me? One last thing I want to share with you, and your professor has given me the thumbs up to just give you some tips if you're interested in interviewing with the health department. We have 4 positions, I hope, opening up in January as a part of expansions. That's because we now inspect marijuana facilities too, and there are about 700 of those in Denver, so we need more inspectors, and I'm hoping that we will get the okay to get 4 more. But just a couple of tips for you on interviewing. And really, this is really not just about the health department, it's about any employer. And I share this with you because something the program manager said to me recently on some interviews that she had done, and it was a little discouraging. I'm sure it wasn't anybody from this school here, but from time to time we see these things during an interview. I've seen them during an interview. So just a couple of tips for you. First of all, when you interview for a position, dress for the position. I've had people show up for interviews in T-shirts, okay? Dress like you want to be an inspector, okay? The second thing is don't be late, okay? I have people show up sometimes 5-10 minutes late, and I'll tell you personally, I will not hire that person, okay? I don't care if there's a lot of traffic. I don't care if there's a lot of construction. You show up on time for interviews, okay? If it means you get to the employer that you're interviewing with, if it means you get there early, an hour early, hey, find the nearest Starbucks, right? It's probably in that building. And go have some coffee and practice answering the questions that you anticipate being asked. But don't be late, okay? Do some research on the position that you're applying for. Sometimes I don't do too many interviews anymore, but I remember that when I used to, I would ask sometimes, what do you know about us? Or do you have any questions about us? And sometimes the applicant will say, no, I don't think so. Or, I had one person show up one time, a gentleman showed up, and we asked him before we got started, do you have any questions for us before we get started? And I kid you not, he said, what is his job again? Okay. But the person who says, yeah, I got a lot of questions for you. I was looking on your website, and I saw that you now allow dogs on patios of restaurants. How does that work? What's that like? Do you get a lot of people at restaurants that want to do that? What's the number one thing that inspectors see in restaurants? What do your inspectors say about how they like the job? Why is this job open? Okay. Is it because of turnover? Or is it because you're expanding? Ask those questions. Do some research. Okay. The other thing I would encourage you to keep in mind is that most employers, and this is true, I think, most employers are going to look at 3 things, mainly. 3 things. First of all, they're going to look to see, do you have the degree that's necessary? And quite honestly, in the city of Denver, by the time the applicants get to our office, we don't ask them about their degrees because the HR office has already confirmed that they have the right degree. So quite honestly, I don't care. We don't ask what the degree is. Okay, that's not the most important thing because, as I said earlier, we teach people what they need to know. The second thing that an employer will look for, and this is certainly true with us, but still not the most important thing, is what's a person's experience. Okay? But, again, if somebody doesn't know how to check temperatures, or they've never worked in a restaurant, or they don't know how to calibrate a thermometer, we're going to teach them that anyways. Okay, so that's not the most important thing. This is. your talent. Okay? What are your talents? And I'm not saying what's your experience or what can you do or what have you done in the past. What are your talents? And talents, the reason that's most important to me, I'll tell you why, is because talents can't be taught. You either have it or you don't. So a good talent for this type of job would be somebody who can talk to a restaurateur who is angry that they just got a fine, still do the inspection, and walk out of that restaurant with the restaurateur happy again. That inspector still is a resource to them and is going to help them keep from getting a fine again. A person who can do that's who I want to talk to. A person who can de-escalate things. And this is huge. A person who has a good attitude. And that is a talent. Because how many times have you tried to tell somebody maybe that works for you and you say, your attitude has to change. And it never does. Why? Because they can't. Okay? You might send somebody to classes on how to communicate or how to be a better communicator or whatever, and a lot of times you wind up with the same employee because that's a talent and it's very hard to teach something like that. So when you're interviewing, highlight what your talents are because the employer's not going to be able to teach you that. So figure out what talents would be good for being an inspector. That's what you want to highlight. And if whoever's interviewing you doesn't focus in on that, you should. Okay? If they don't ask you that, tell them anyways. When they say, do you have any questions, you might say, I don't have any questions, but I do want to share with you that it seems like de-escalation skills would be pretty huge in this job. I just want to share with you that I'm pretty good at that. Okay? That's what you should be doing, selling yourself. Okay? It's quite honestly, for the last round of positions we had open, there were close to 150 people that applied for 4 positions. So you really want to stand out during that interview process. Okay? Any questions for me before we wrap it up? Yeah, I took probably way too much time again, I'm sure. Yes?
As far as your internship process goes, how far into your degree do you take?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Her question was, as far as being an intern, how far along do you have to be? And I believe that, and this is a HR rule, not a rule for our department specifically, but I believe that a person has to finish their degree within 2 years, or maybe it's a year and a half. Okay? Other questions for me? What it's like to be an inspector or anything like that? Anything about food safety? Yes?
Do you love doing your job, or?
Do I? Yeah, I do. I meet a lot of people. It's funny, when I went through college, I used to tell myself, I don't care what kind of job I have, but man, I don't want the kind of job where I have to do any public speaking. But here I am. I meet a lot of people. There are a lot of programs that we have. It's very diverse, very flexible in terms of the hours that the inspectors keep. Pretty much 40 hours a week when they want. So, yes.
What is the salary like?
Oh, that's a good question. This young lady's question is, what's the salary? And I wish I had an answer for that. I think entry-level, I'll be honest with you, entry-level inspectors, I believe, start out around $43,000 a year. They only have to put 2 years in order to be a senior-level inspector. And then I think then they move up to 50 or 55, something like that. A senior-level investigator will top out at just under $80,000. And then there's a specialist position, which is above a senior-level investigator, and I think that caps out at about 85 or 90 supervisors. I think I know the caps because it's related to the budget forms that I fill out. I know, so that's why I know that a little bit better. Supervisors is somewhere caps out around 100, and program managers around 115 or something like that. Okay. Yes.
Besides doing the restaurant inspections, what other jobs do you have to do along with that?
Well, you mean the investigators? Well, there are, as I said earlier, I have people who do restaurant inspections or food safety investigators, residential health They'll investigate, complaints where tenants are filing a complaint that their landlord didn't do something, or sometimes the landlord's complaining and their tenant's keeping their apartment a mess. Residential health, yeah. Well, it's by program. So usually a person who's doing food inspections is in the food program, but they can transfer if they want to. And then body art and assisted living, child care, swimming pools, marijuana, noise. So, any other questions for me? Go ahead.
Someone else can ask. Go ahead. Go ahead.
You said you have more positions opening up. Are those all just marijuana?
Well, I'm hopeful. No, it's based on the increase in marijuana facilities because we inspect those, but they wouldn't be doing marijuana inspections just that. The reason that we call them marijuana inspectors, but that's what's bringing them in. But quite honestly, they're going to be a food inspector investigating food facilities where marijuana is infused into food product. But all the inspectors do that. It's just that because of the number of more facilities, the districts have to get smaller because it's one more place we have to inspect. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Did you have a question?
Well, I was going to ask, how many complaints do you get every year or so?
This gentleman's question was how many complaints do we get? Depends upon the program. Residential health, 1,500 to 2,000 a year. In the food program, maybe 400 or 500. That would be not including food poisoning complaints. In child care, it's not quite as many. Noise complaints, 400 or 500 a year. So just kind of all over the board. Okay. Any other questions for me? Yes?
How many violations does it take to close down the restaurant, right?
Okay, this young lady's question, in case you didn't hear it, how many violations before a restaurant gets closed? It could be 1, or it could be 15 or more. It just depends upon the nature of the violation. If the investigator goes in and the hot water heater broke down, there's no hot water, if that's the only violation, they would close. But you could have a restaurant that had 4 or 5 critical violations, but of the type that wouldn't require that they be closed. So it really just depends upon the nature of the violation. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, sure.
What is the best thing to use to clean food prep and counters and like that?
Soap and water. Yeah, soap and warm water. His question was what's the best thing to clean prep surfaces? Soap and water. And then when you go to sanitize that, you want to make sure that you get all the soap off. It's for the same principle that your dish machine here does a wash, rinse, and sanitize. Or for those of you who work in a commercial kitchen, when you have a 3-compartment sink, you have to wash, rinse, and then sanitize. That rinse in the middle sink is to get the soap off because soap is organic, and any organic matter will bind with the sanitizer and tie it up so that it can't kill bacteria. So that's why you have to wash it and rinse to get the organic soap off, then sanitize it last. Okay. Anything else? I think my job is done here. Okay. All right. Thank you all for your time.